We wanted a dedicated funding structure, training opportunities for young people, looking at the role of maybe like the social economy in creating sustainable jobs. Maybe statutory obligation from the youth work sector to engage with these kind of issues. And really, that's it.
Expect an outlet for people to lobby at a UN delegate. And another thing will be a follow-up from this from the NYCI. About the goals then will be the language toned down to engage with young people who are disengaged from this type of process. And the last final point is a creative piece regarding the goals that will be created by young people that could be shown on TV, YouTube.
So we came up with a number of things. What we decided first of all is that we need a supportive, positive mindset in order to approach SDGs properly. And this needs to be in the general population, organisations and government. It needs to be positive and inclusive. Young people need to be encouraged to think positively and big, and they need help from parents, schools, media, social media in order to do that. The messages that young people receive should be positive and free from long-held misconceptions and stereotypes that maybe we have as adults. Where are the positive stories about Millennium Development Goals that we can take into the SDGs? Where is the accountability?
We want visibility of key players who are contactable. We want to be able to reach people, not just the receptionists. We need structural change, like in education systems, where we can systematically include sustainable development. We need to equip students with the skills and knowledge to implement all of this, and we need our classes to be food for change. We need more age-friendly language to allow the youth to understand these sustainable development goals.
Rethink, responsibility, and raising awareness. And then we talked about reusing the supports that were already available through commitment for collaboration and working in partnership to strengthen Goal 17, which is strengthening the means of implementation and revitalize the global, and we also said, and local partnership for sustainable development.
We wanted kind of a green flag initiative in secondary schools because it's very predominant in primary schools, but it's not really pushed on in secondary schools. We want a chance for people's voices to be heard, actions viewed, and equal representation of every voice, whether it be someone who's an expert or someone who's like us working like in a youth organisation. We want advertisement for groups, like governments could put a awareness campaign for how we can get involved in making a change. Make the powerful people put their power to positive use, like try and get subsidies from higher powers like the UN and EU and put them in renewable energy sources so that everyone can see the positive effects from it.
Our culmination was our wish that those in power focus on the goals that are achievable and workable and have the foresight to work on issues that will have a long-term knock-on effect. If the goals could be broken down into manageable working groups that we as citizens can engage with in a meaningful and sustained manner.
In our group, we drew like some really clear links between personal actions and what we can ask of the key players. So it's on us all to make ourselves aware of the development of the goals going forward.
And we like to see cause and effect based education so people don't feel removed from issues, and so that they can see how a changing lifestyle will have a positive effect on things.
To have more honest information in terms of investments, to create a way to highlight the connection between climate change and the local impact to make information more transparent, to have a public face for some of the issues that were brought up today, like what Emma Watson did for gender equality, to have more accountability for decisions that are made by our representatives, and their words need to communicate into more action.
Very simply, it was decided at this table very strongly that young people are assets, that young people can be the carriers and transmitters of the positive messages from the SDGs. And I guess the question for the big players is how can they support and enable young people to be peer educators and to be the ones who communicate the importance and strength of the goals. Another little flavour was elections are next year, and what's in the manifestos of the political parties? Are the SDGs in there? And we should be asking that, and if they're not, why not?
So there's obviously some issues around how people are made aware of what is available. I think the issue of accountability came up very strongly in several places, and perhaps somebody on the panel would like to respond to that. And I suppose tied into that, the whole thing around transparency and kind of honesty and openness around what's happening. I think there was a challenge generally, but voiced in different ways, around the rhetoric around torchbearer, but how is that actually translated into positive action so that we're actually improving the inclusion of young people in a real and meaningful way, not just kind of in one-off events, but on an ongoing basis. The issue of the development of resources, which we know has been a major issue in terms of being able to secure funding for the development of resources over a number of years, and that has been highlighted quite strongly about the importance of those and the need for those. Also, I think a point in terms of response about the absence of a human rights perspective in anything that has been developed to date. That's only a whistle-stop tour of what's been written down, but I think they were some of the key things that were emerging, and you've all got your own notes. So who wants to kick off? Shall I just start across the line? Hilary.
Oh, I was going to start line over there. Okay, I've been thinking about this a lot today, and I suppose I'm here very particularly, I suppose, as a youth work educator. So youth work education rather than development education is my particular area of interest and I suppose expertise. And I'm here today with the third-year students from Maynooth University who are doing the BA in Community and Youth Work as part of a Development Studies module. So I've been thinking about today, I suppose, picking up on the things that people have been saying maybe from the informal and non-formal perspective. And it seems to me that one of the things we need to be thinking about in youth work is really about, ideally, I suppose, if I was to think about it, move away from the notion of sort of development education into a way of thinking about youth work where it's inconceivable that the idea of development and sustainable development and then a very explicit human rights dimension to that, it's inconceivable that we would do youth work without that sort of awareness and without that sort of practice, so that we don't make that sort of a distinction, so that in some way a concern with development and human development and sustainable human development is not only the concern of the committed few, but is embedded in all aspects of sort of practice and conscious practice of both young people and the workers who work with them. I also think in youth work terms we have some opportunities that we should be looking to build into at the moment. One is in relation to trying to embed some of these ideas very explicitly into our quality frameworks, into the emerging youth strategy, and as it comes around again is something around, say, the North-South ETS in terms of standards for youth work education, an explicit commitment to thinking about development and sustainability as one of the core skills in youth work. The other thing I think that really strikes me is the idea around accountability and governance. And I do think that there's a real challenge for us there to engage with the real political, with a small p, dimensions of young people's lives. I think sometimes we can get a bit caught up with the experiences of the young people that we work with and live alongside in some way. But actually, if we begin to work with young people to understand the things that frame and in some way control those lives, there's inevitably a global dimension to that. Our lives are never lived singularly. So it seems to me that part of what we need to be doing is also looking to push around sort of having a long-term perspective around things. So thinking in terms of generations rather than terms of office. And I think that means a sort of a different sort of politics and a different ways of thinking about politics, and youth work in having a role around the social and personal and development of young people, also having that sort of a role in terms of who they are and how they live their lives. And finally, I suppose it strikes me that we've heard a lot of talk about awareness, and at the table I was at there this afternoon, there was sort of a bit of, oh, is awareness enough? And I do think it's true that awareness isn't enough. And it seems to me that if I was to make a commitment for myself as a youth work educator, that what I would be wanting to work with our students is around developing awareness, but following on from that awareness, building on that is a willingness to act and a capacity to act. That's me.
Yeah, okay. Niall.
Okay. I should explain a little bit what my function is as well. I'm in the Department of Foreign Affairs in the multilateral unit, and I'm called the Lead for Post-2015. So I've been the negotiator during the development of the 17 goals, and now that our ambassador to the UN has got the co-facilitator chair, I work in a support function to convey points of principle and policy from Ireland into the EU negotiations, and also support the negotiations at the UN. So in terms of access, I just think that the Irish team, so to speak, to look at it from a national perspective, has had incredible access to this process. We've had the good fortune that it was the Irish presidency who more or less set out the EU position at the beginning, and at the UN it was also the preceding Irish ambassador who negotiated the dynamics of the structure of the phase that's actually happening right now. And some of the positives of that has been because civil society participation is a very central part of Ireland's cooperation priorities. Civil society's presence in these negotiations has been a key principle that's been defended, and the process of negotiation for these goals is completely unique. There's never been anything like it. Normally UN negotiations are text by text, comma by comma, whereas now we've had a process of massive online consultation. There's statistically representative opinions that have been gathered from a number of African countries as to what their priorities are. The Minister of Foreign Affairs has been able to convey in his speech to the General Assembly, to all the member states, views that were gathered from some members of this room who were consulted in that. So that access is something that is really, really vital, and I think we've been very fortunate that conduit is there, and it's great that we're able to continue with that. But I think that at the same time, a lot of the critiques and observations that you're making on these are observations and critiques that are being made across the sphere of everyone who's looking at this issue. Never before in history have there been an effort to bring together issues of development, governance, and the environment at the same time. The MDGs were essentially about essential services. It was, in some respects, the non-confrontational, the non-challenging issues that had to be addressed. Almost every table here has mentioned accountability, transparency, communication. You've been asking, where is my voice in this? Where's the entry point for this? And that is a dynamic which has intentionally been built into this process, and it's not without its opponents that the actual implementation of this should be accountable to groups such as this. It should be accountable to citizens at the national level, and that is possibly one of the biggest game changers in this agenda. So Goal 16's presence is really one of the most significant steps forward. Others here have talked about 17 goals. It's too many. It's got challenges to communicate. It certainly does, and I think everyone can see that. But the nature of this product is that it's been something that 193 countries have been pushing forward their priority. There's a number of goals that are separated out that are there essentially because, for example, oceans, some weren't in favour of oceans being a standalone goal. But as I was communicating to the table, when you're in the room and you hear Nauru explaining that they're beginning to plan where they're going to lease land in Australia to move their population when their country sinks below the waves, that's the reality. Some nation states who are sitting in the UN, their physical ground won't exist anymore. And they're already developing contingency plans as to where they're going to relocate their population, their culture. They're going to be leaving behind their graves, everything. You know, so the priorities that are there are very many because they're representing very many situations, and it's not going to be easy. But I think the points that are being made here as well about, well, how do you prioritize within that? The actual mechanism by which this global plan, once finalized, and the detail of these goals, there's 169 targets under them. They won't be finalized in the sense of being signed off on until September. There's still indicators to be developed, so there's still a work in process, but it's highly unlikely that anything's going to change with those goals. But the process by which those global goals become national goals, that hasn't been negotiated yet. So what you're talking about is how will Ireland integrate this, and at the global scale, will the world be remade in the light of the SDGs. This is a huge challenge. If you look at the financing aspect of this, and today it's been discussed about in the sense of civil society funding, but also funding essential services, addressing issues of inequality in Ireland. These are some of the issues that I've heard at the table today. But most of the money for this is about redirecting private expenditure. Today, you've been looking critically at our own consumption patterns, and those are the types of decisions which will change things. And it's about what will future investments in companies, how will they be incentivized and regulated that their outcome will lead to sustainable development outcomes, so that the role and the expectations of what the private sector will do globally in this are absolutely huge, but they're not fully integrated into the discussion yet. They're present and they have a voice, but it remains to be seen how that will be teased out over years. And that's something that any citizen in a country where they can voice and express their views should hopefully have an influence over. In terms of the practical roles of young people, I mean, the examples that we've been hearing today are already showing really dramatic and I think impactful examples in ways in which people are conveying their views on this. So one of the points that Mark made earlier about what can you do, I was thinking here at the beginning of the day, to be honest, you must feel as if there's a huge wall between your thinking and your priorities in this process. But in the course of the day, it's actually clear that a lot of your ideas are getting over and through and around that wall. And engaging with the major group for children and youth is a really effective way. They have a speaking right in this process. So different civil society organizations who are members of that can convey their priorities, and they are speaking directly to all of the decision makers in this process. So that's another way. And just as a final point in terms of consultation that we are doing here, DOCUS has got an umbrella group, which I know quite a number of you are involved in, that are looking at the Beyond 2015 issues. We're meeting with them on a fairly regular basis, and there's also been a long exchange of detailed language over priorities and issues to put forward, and those informed a lot of the Irish positions that were put forward in the negotiation of these 17 goals. And those opinions are still being fed in to ensure that our co-facilitators, whilst they have to have a neutral role, are aware of the priorities that are coming up. So definitely would encourage all of the groups to continue to use those channels to link to them and ensure those of us who are involved at the negotiation level are up to date with the thinking, the analysis, the ideas, the suggestions. Because one good idea, one well-delivered statement can really make an impact. And I'll share one last thought. The spokesperson for the children and youth is a young Dutch woman. I think she's about 19. She delivered a presentation last year. And at the end of it, she said, normally when we young people speak, you, the older ambassadors, nod and say how proud you are of us. And she said, I'm not interested in your opinion. You should be interested in mine. It's for me to be proud of you. And it was brilliant. It just woke everyone up. They went, yeah, actually, it's not about us. We're about to retire and drift off. It's about her life and her future. So, do use those channels. Be selective, seek out key issues, convey clarity on it, because this is a complex agenda. The clearer the idea, the more practical, the more informative and impactful it will be. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Niall. And we do appreciate, you spending the entire day with us and hearing firsthand, the views of the views of everybody in the room. And obviously, what we hope is we've opened a channel of communication, so that's very important as well. So thanks for that, Jen.
Okay. Well, hello everybody. My name's Jen from Trócaire. Maybe I'll explain a little bit about what we do in our development education programme in Trócaire. So our ultimate goal is to support children and young people to make connections between their own lives and the lives of other people globally. And also, in doing so, to challenge perceptions and then positive and negative stereotypes that people have, and fundamentally to enable children and young people to become agents of change. So a really important way that we do this is actually by targeting teachers and educators. So I was very interested to hear a lot of feedback around influencing the education system, because I think that's absolutely vital if the SDGs are going to be a success, and if people are going to be aware of them in Ireland. And it was mentioned on this side of the room here around working with primary school children. So Trócaire works with children from the age of 3 right up to adults to 18 in our development education programme. And we've done a number of research projects in partnership with St. Patrick's College in Drumcondra. And one of the research projects was around how young is too young for children to engage in global justice issues. So we worked with 3 to 6-year-olds to see if young people could engage in global issues. And actually the findings were that they absolutely can, but by the time they get through the education system, often they've experienced prejudice and so forth. So it's really, really important to work with children from a very young age. And also for Trócaire, I suppose it's around training teachers and supporting teachers to integrate issues and I suppose themes like the Sustainable Development Goals into their teaching practice. But I'd firmly support what Hilary said around making sure that it isn't seen as a separate subject, that development education isn't seen as this isolated thing that maybe one teacher or one youth worker is interested in, that it's absolutely integrated into the programme work of youth workers and the education system as well. And obviously to influence policy and curricula as well. Like, so for example, you know, you've got an absolutely fabulous syllabus like Politics and Society that's sitting with the Department of Education for the last number of years, you know, and there'd be so much potential in that course to explore sustainable development goals. You know, you have a case where you can study citizenship education in Ireland until about the age of 15, 16, and then your opportunities are reduced, which is pretty mind-blowing if you think about, you know, you're coming up to the voting age and you don't have the opportunity to engage in critical issues like this. So just to say, yeah, the education system would be really important in terms of the goals. Also, I thought it was really interesting what people said around accessibility and language. Like, even for me, I find it really intimidating trying to read some government policy. Like, at the moment in Trócaire, a huge focus for us is the climate bill, which is in the Dáil at the moment. And I actually had to sit down with colleagues and have them work through it with me so I could understand it, because the language is completely inaccessible. But it's about knowing where to find accessibility. So even, you know, if you're interested in an issue like the climate bill, you know, maybe to go to the NYCI and to ask, well, who's working on this issue? You know, how can I find out more? Because Trócaire's job, fundamentally, from our perspective, is to make this accessible to people. And we've done that with the climate bill, and we have a number of young people at the moment who are lobbying their local TDs on this issue. And a number of people, Heather mentioned the event tonight in Buswell's Hotel, so we hope that a lot of our young activists will come there tonight to meet their TDs. Just maybe 1 or 2 more issues. I think celebrating success and positivity is really important as well. And I think Tony may mention this as well, like celebrating the successes of the Millennium Development Goals, you know, and how far we've come as well, because we tend to focus a lot on, you know, what we haven't done or what we haven't reached, but actually we've achieved quite a lot, you know. And I think for young people as well, it's really important to celebrate successes, and particularly in your local community, and to communicate these successes, because it can help challenge stereotypes around young people in Ireland as well, you know, and young people being disenfranchised and so forth. But actually, you know, there's real power in celebrating successes, you know, because I think it can really influence people as well and challenge mindsets as well, particularly of older generations. And the last thing really to say is, just anecdotally, in Trócaire, over the past number of months, we've been looking at what our theory of change is. And what a theory of change is really about looking at Trócaire's work overseas and really trying to understand, how does Trócaire believe that change happens in the communities with whom we work? And one of the fundamental assumptions that Trócaire has made in terms of change is that young people are necessary for change, that our programs will not work unless we engage young people in them. And that goes for our work overseas and our work in Ireland as well. You know, and when we came up with this assumption, we were asked to provide evidence for it, you know, and it was actually quite easy, because if you look at every single social movement that has changed the course of history over the last century, it's been heavily influenced by young people. So just to recognize, you know, I know you hear all the time probably about young people being bandied about by adults saying agents of change and this and that, but fundamentally, like, young people are agents of change, and like Trócaire believes that, you know, our work will not be possible, that no change can happen without young people on board. So just to be really mindful of that as well, of the power that you have. Yeah.
And I understand at one of the tables, some of the young people said, you know, you have made such a mess of it and you're expecting us to sort it out for you. So it was a challenge back in terms of the legacy that adults are passing on to young people as well. Okay, Tony.
So yeah, just my name's Tony, as everyone can probably see from that, and I'm from 8020, and I'm also a writer for developmenteducation.ie, and we've worked with the crew from Celtic Youth Bray recently on the Aid Mural project as well. So we work on development education purely in 8020, and on deved.ie we work in a consortium of NGOs really interested in bringing development education out there and making it accessible across Ireland to youth workers in adult and community settings, as well as to formal education settings. And Trócaire is a part of that partnership, as well as a range of NGOs in Ireland. There's Concern, the Self-Help Africa, AidLink, and the Irish Development Education Association. A bunch of us doing it. So just to see, my cards are out there. In terms of responses, I have a few comments to make, but a lot has been said, and I'm not sure if I'm going to cover any new ground with it, but it's probably just, I've condensed it a little bit, but the contributions have been fantastic and very challenging, I think, in terms of how some of the organisations that are in the room, that are the people that we look to support this kind of work, are listening attentively and are very consciously taking in a lot of what's happening. So it's a big listening exercise for people that do support this kind of work, and valuable contributions have been made towards that. So just the points I have to make. First one is about language, around the language of development. Is it accessible, is it not? And that's came out in lots of different groups. And I mean, I'm not going to go over that, but just the ways that we can access this stuff is quite important to how we understand and how we communicate it ourselves. As kind of a broader point on language, even from what Hans was saying and minding our language, it's a case of thinking about, well, I'm thinking about how departments understand this agenda as well. I mean, we have the Department of Foreign Affairs here today, we've had Irish Aid here today, and how something like sustainable development is understood between departments when we talk about business and trade and agriculture. And then we have conversations about climate change. Oh, climate change, oh, that's Department of Environment. That couldn't be business. Or what about human rights? Oh, well, that's Irish Aid. That's not trade. In Saudi Arabia, for example, when we're going on trade missions. Part of it is about language, that interdepartmentally, what is being discussed. Like, it's about real collaboration that's going on around this agenda. There's a lot of negotiation, a lot of conversations that we're having, but what's the language that's being used and the ownership in terms of this agenda, in terms of interdepartmental work? It's a continual thing that keeps coming back to us in our work, and we see it coming through even from today, about people mean different things depending on where you work. And that's problematic, and I think that's a challenge for us to bring up and to flag as we go along. I know that a contribution earlier from Dymphna was Dymphna mentioned from Irish Aid, talked about targets for climate change are essential. They're crucial, is what she said. That's interesting considering the meeting that's going on today with Friends of the Earth and with Trócaire and others around the climate bill that's coming out next week, and about targets and the argument about targets being pulled out of it based on committee recommendations for it. Some of it is about who means what, and how does that spread across departments, who's just saying it. And so there's a challenge in terms of what we might expect of governments and departments to talk to each other, because it seems like we might be fighting on many fronts rather than just talking to governments. That's that point. So that was one thing about language. In terms of education, my brief comment on education is everyone has talked about it quite a lot more, development education, the emphasis on education and formal ed. Civic and social political education didn't come about by accident. It was on the back of a serious amount of lobbying of a lot of NGOs in the main, and various people that have been working on development issues for many, many years, 20, 30 years, to bring citizenship education and formalise it. And in CSP, that's how it came about. And it's actually relatively new, around as old as the MDGs themselves. That stuff didn't come about by accident. It's about being vigilant and arguing for people to learn this stuff about development, underdevelopment, overdevelopment. So my comment about that is to be brave about education itself. We're not going to get all the solutions from formal education. We can't expect that to be the case. ESD, the fight to get it in, has taken quite some time. There's lots of issues that aren't taught in formal education when we think of topics like genocide, when we think of topics like, well, that's one example, but overseas aid and making connections with it. Those are just two very brief examples, but lots of human rights-based examples as well can be brought in. So all I'm saying is that in terms of education, it's about what you want, what you expect of education, work towards bringing that about as well, not expecting it to be handed out or just delivered in a ready format that we can just engage with, particularly as Jen was saying with politics and society at Leaving Cert. What happens with development education after that? Do people feel like they have opportunities to actually engage in these difficult issues and complex issues at that as well? I mean, it's a complex agenda. I mean, are we preparing young people to actually grapple with these issues, or are we letting them down? Some would argue we're letting them down. The fact that we haven't got a Leaving Cert subject that engages directly around democratic issues, around politics and society, on the philosophies behind this stuff and the real challenges for that generation to take it on. Some would say that we are letting them down. So that's another thing as well. It's about being vigilant and actually being brave around what we deliver on in terms of what we want out of education. And just as a kind of final point to the education bit, is that before CSPE, which, you know, as I said, is new, for many, many years, it was the NGOs and solidarity groups and people learning in groups outside of formal ed about teaching each other and solidarity amongst groups and working collaboratively to build knowledge and awareness so as to lobby and to make arguments for an overseas aid program, which wasn't by accident, by the way, as Tom Arnold mentioned earlier. That was fought hard for many, many years to bring about, for us to formalize doing this kind of thing, which lots of people have been doing from society for years. So some of it is about remembering. We remember in different ways, and it's about us not forgetting that. So it's about taking ownership of education, and as I said, about bringing that as far as you can, or at least exploring different ways that can be brought out in your different groups. And this kind of format allows that to happen, where we can educate each other. It's not just about expectations of others, it's expectations of ourselves and how we're delivering that to each other and supporting each other to do that. So that's that as well. In terms of action planning and that comment, which came up a few times, about how we deal with this agenda and the full meaning of democracy in Ireland, and whether lots of people have actually had an opportunity to engage, whether people are from marginalised groups, from direct provision centres and that potential, about travellers engaging with this agenda as well. Those are challenges in terms of the action planning leading up to what is September and the SDGs, and then following on from it as well. How do we actually deal with these things? These are great challenges. I'd like to see some answers on that. I'm not going to be able to give that to you now, but this is something that we should collectively talk about. Our young people, what's the survey in terms of our survey work being done with people below the age of 30 on the SDGs? And that stuff should be pushed out there. Is there a committee of young people who are deciding and releasing a report on this stuff so that their position is clear and actually quite challenging as well? And you're not going to be comfortable with that because it is uncomfortable, because they have particular opinions. So yes, I would say that's the kind of thing that we should be doing as well. And the action planning agenda is absolutely crucial. And just the last thing then, based on what Jen was saying there about successes, too often when we're doing this kind of stuff, we don't take stock of the successes, of the small wins as we've gone along, giving opportunity for people to share their work, like what we saw the showcase earlier with the youth groups presenting their works and their profiles and their just the result of a lot of the work that they have been doing for years. We need to do more of that kind of thing, you know, celebrating the successes, or as the Barefeet crew, as Michael said, it was about carnivals, you know, and events. We need to be doing that because that's what bolsters us. I mean, this agenda is meaningful, and if it's not accessible, well, then it becomes dry and it becomes something that people don't actually make an emotional connection with. So part of our work, I think, is to make this stuff emotionally accessible to our friends, our family, our colleagues, and to each other. And that only happens through these kinds of events, but sharing of successes, having those carnivals, and taking stock through those kinds of things. I know that just on deved.ie, we have a range of case studies of people that have sent them in, of things that they've done in terms of development education projects, which are there for, it's a showcase for people to look at and learn from. And it's part of us just thinking about how do we remember and capture, how do we remember the history of doing development and challenging and the challenges that are around these issues? How do we take ownership of that? And what have we learned? too often that stuff goes into reports or it disappears quickly once there's been a quick media flurry. So this is about us owning that agenda, and the ownership is about us doing that and remembering and supporting each other to do that without expecting official recognition all the time for that kind of thing. So it's about community, it's about solidarity, and it's about resilience. So that's kind of taking.
Okay, thank you very much. And I think, I mean, the point that has particular resonance for me is about the whole systems approach to sustainable development. And I think, you know, when we talk about interagency working, often it's looking down or across and saying it's something you need to do. But I actually do think you're absolutely right. And we're finding it in so many situations whereby, you know, one government department's bit of it is just what they are concerned about. And I compare it a bit like a beach ball, where if you're standing on the blue bit, that's the only bit you see, and someone who's on the green bit just sees that. But really, I think in terms of government, it's a need for somebody to be up above it and looking at all of those bits that interact, really. And I think that is a real challenge. If we crack that, we'd really be making progress. So thanks. Sorry, Niall, do you want to?
Yeah, I can just say that the points that have been raised about the challenge that this presents to any government are absolutely enormous. We do have an interdepartmental working group on this that's been meeting for the past year. So it is the case that we're trying to build up a sensitization across all departments that this is an agenda that will be coming to Ireland. This is an agenda where actions will be expected to be taken in Ireland, from Ireland, and that activities in Ireland and their impact on global commons will also have to be taken into consideration. So that is a process that's going on. But even at the EU level, I don't think that the penny has fully dropped across the board as to just what will this mean, because this has always been an outward agenda. What the developed countries, they're labelled, would do for and on behalf of least or less developed, whereas this is a universal agenda that all countries need to take. So, I mean, these are real challenges, and as I said earlier, practical approaches are also being sought.
Well done.